Hey, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and in today's video, we're going to be going back to basics and looking at how to build a header for your WordPress site using Oxygen. Now, I want to start this video with a little bit of discussion about what a header is. Let's jump over to the MDN document here, and they describe very simply the header HTML element represents introductory content, typically a group of introductory or navigational aids. Most of you are probably familiar with headers kind of like this, where you have your site logo and then some navigation links, maybe a search bar, maybe a call to action, things like that. Then as you go down, you get to the content. But a header can also be kind of a combination between this concept and a hero section. In fact, some designers that I've read articles by actually classify everything above the fold kind of as a header. So if we go over to Stripe, this is a good example of that. Traditionally, I would call this our header up here with our navigation and our dashboard button, but this a hero section. But in some cases, your header actually includes kind of a hero, which is what we see here. And then we have something like WordPress.org, which is a little bit more traditional, but does also include some prominent content here at the top. Now, the thing that for me differentiates is, for example, on Stripe, if we go over to another page, for instance, the header is not always a header hero combo. In fact, this up here is the only persistent part between the home page and subpages, which is why I like to kind of break those out. But we'll kind of explore that idea a little bit as we build something out in Oxygen. Now, let's close out these example sites and let's jump into Oxygen. We're going to go to Oxygen and templates from our WordPress admin panel. And because this is going to be a header that persists across our entire site, we want it in a template. So we're going to click Add Template. And I usually call my header and footer template main, just to imply that it is my main template. And then where does it apply? We're going to go to Other and Catch All. This will make sure it applies everywhere on the site. Let's go ahead and publish that, and we'll go ahead and jump into Oxygen. There's one element we need that's kind of specific to Oxygen, which is the inner content element. This is the little cutout window in our template that lets us see whatever is behind it or whatever the template is rendering. Let's switch over to a blank page so that we can kind of start from scratch here. And now we have a decision to make. In Oxygen, there's a dedicated element called the header builder. This element offers some really nice advantages. So let's drop one in and we'll talk about this for a minute. And of course, we want this up at the top of our design, so let's drag that up. The header builder is basically made up of rows and columns. Each header row has a row left, row center, and row right. And your header builder can have multiple rows, which can be really handy for things like a main header and then a smaller header up top with some other secondary navigation links or something like that. Now, why would you choose to use the header builder versus just building it out yourself? Well, the header builder has two important functionalities built in that make it really, really convenient if you need those functionalities. So if we go over here to the properties pane, we're going to see sticky and overlay. So if we go into sticky, we can enable a sticky header, which means our header is going to stick to the top of our screen. Let me give that a background color so you can see what's happening. It's going to stick to the top of our screen after we've scrolled a certain distance, which by default is 300 pixels. So that's a very nice feature that's not as easy to achieve if you roll your own. Now, of course, if you want it to always be sticky and you set that to 0, well, you may as well just use a div and set it to position sticky and top 0. We might talk about that here in a minute. But basically, if you need a sticky header, the header builder gives you a great option for that. Now, it also has the overlay option, which basically allows you to choose a breakpoint, and at that breakpoint or above, this header is going to overlay whatever comes after it in the website structure. Again, doable with just building things out with sections or divs, but to have just a couple of clicks get this thing set up for you is nice. Now, with both of these options, we do have an additional feature on the header rows that makes it all just that much more enticing. With our header rows, we can decide whether to show them based on the state of the header itself. So we can choose to only show in sticky or hide in sticky, and we can choose to only show in overlay or hide in overlay, which means we can kind of form our header rows around the state of the header builder as a whole. For instance, let's give this a background color of black, and then we want to go ahead and remove the overlay state. So let's go back to header builder, overlay, and let's just disable that. So now we have this black header. Let's go ahead and add another header row, and we'll give it a differentiating color here. Let's do red. And if we want the red one to only show when the header is sticky, for instance, we've scrolled down 300 pixels and the header is stuck to the top of the viewport, we can choose only show in sticky, which means we're not going to see it now because the header is not in its sticky state yet. Now on this other header row, we can choose hide in sticky. So the effect that has is that when the header becomes sticky, they basically swap. These header rows will never be visible at the same time. Let's enable the sticky header. You see we have our black header row here. If we scroll down, we get our red header row. So while you can definitely achieve sticky and overlay headers using basic elements, there's a lot of additional JavaScript and stuff that goes into the logic of how the header builder handles not only the sticky and overlay states, but also the conditional display of header rows in those states. So if you don't need these more advanced functionalities, it's perfectly fine and probably a good idea to skip the header builder entirely and just build with a div or something like that. But if you're going to use a div, you do need to make sure that you use the proper tag. So make sure you go down here to the properties pane and set the tag to header. The header builder has the tag set by default, so you don't have to mess with that on that one. Then with this div, you have complete custom control over the layout, whereas the header builder is a little bit more limited with its 3 columns, the left, center, and right. So there are definitely trade-offs with both, so I would say choose your approach based on what you need for the project. If I need a sticky or overlay header, I'm probably going to choose the header builder. If I don't, and I also need something a little bit more custom, I'm probably going to build it out with a div. So let's go back to the header builder and I'll just show you an example of building out a simple header with this element. Let's drop it in and again move it up to the top. Now, like I said, we have a left, center, and right area in the header row. Let's go ahead and we're going to drop in a link wrapper. This is going to hold our site logo. But first, let's go to advanced attributes and set the title to go home. And then we can set up our other link attributes here in the primary tab. I do want to have a little bit of padding on this, so we'll do size and spacing and set the padding to 1 rem. And then we'll apply that all the way across. Now let's go ahead and drop in an image element. And I do have one uploaded from Logo Ipsum, so I'll drop that in. Let's make it a little bit wider. So now we have our logo. The next thing we're going to need for a really basic header is a navigation element. So we're going to add the site navigation element. This is going to give us a solid basic menu to use. We can adjust the colors to match our branding. Now note that the menu items themselves are coming from WordPress. So you go to the WordPress admin panel and set up your menu there, and then you can use it via the site navigation element in Oxygen. So now we have our logo and our site navigation. This looks pretty good. Now a header should probably have a call to action. If your site has a job, meaning it needs to make visitors do a thing, then you should have a call to action. In this case, I've built the menu out with the idea that order now is our call to action. So we'll go over here and choose CTA styles and just turn that CTA style on for that last item. And like that, we've got a header. The header builder makes it super easy. It kind of positions everything where it needs to be. And let's go ahead and tell this menu to switch to mobile at 992 pixels. Now, the last thing we want to do for a basic header like this is we want to make sure that we're stacking vertically at a certain breakpoint. So probably less than 992 will work for that as well. So let's go ahead and step down. And you can see at this breakpoint, we get a nice stacked layout, which will work perfectly on mobile all the way down to very, very small devices. And there's our mobile menu. So for a basic header, this really ticks all the boxes. It looks nice, it's clean, and it gets you the necessary site navigation you need and your site logo right there at the top. Now, because we're using the header builder, I'll show you how to add an additional row as well. So we're going to select the header builder and click add another row. Now this one, I want to have it above our main header row. And I don't want it to be the exact same color. So let's set it to like a light gray. And this is going to hold some secondary links for us. So let's go ahead and add a div. And then this div is actually going to be another navigation element. So let's go ahead and set it to the nav tag. And we're going to want to give it a title to differentiate it from the main navigation down here, which is set to main. So this one we can set to under attributes. We're going to go ahead and add an ARIA label attribute and call it secondary. Now, because this is a navigation element semantically, screen readers and things like that will recognize that we don't have to write secondary navigation or else we get this redundant readout. So with that taken care of, we can now add our links. Now, these should probably be in a list, so we'll have to use a custom tag for that. So let's go ahead and drop in another div, and this is going to be a UL. So we'll click use custom tag, change that to a UL. Now our styling is going to get a little bit weird because the browser has a bunch of default styles for lists. We'll have to override those, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and add our links and then we'll deal with all that. Now, because this is a list, these direct children need to be list items. So we'll start with the div here, and we're going to go ahead and change that tag using the custom tag checkbox there to LI. Now we're going to drop in our text links. So we'll go ahead and find text link and drop that in. Now you'll see we get the list styles here, which we're going to take care of here in a minute. But for now, we'll go ahead and add a few of these links. This one's going to say my account, and then we'll go ahead and go up one to that list item div. We're going to duplicate that twice, and then we'll do my orders. And then the last one will be affiliates. Now we're going to need to do some styling to the UL itself to go ahead and get rid of some of the spacing that we don't want. So let's open this up over here and make sure we have the right thing selected. So there is our UL and each of our list items within that. So let's go ahead and select that. We'll go to advanced custom CSS and we'll do list style type none. That gets rid of our little discs there that indicate the list items. Then we're going to want to do padding inline start 0, I believe, and then margin block start 0 and margin block end 0. That gets rid of all the default stylings associated with an unordered list that we don't want in this particular case. Now we can go ahead over here to our layout controls, set everything to horizontal, and we'll go ahead and add a gap of 1 rem. That looks good. Now we can go ahead and move our custom navigation element over to row right in this header row. Now, one of the last layout adjustments we need to make is to select the header row and actually add a little bit of padding on the top and bottom. So we're going to go with 0.25 rem. And then we'll just copy and paste that down there to the bottom to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. Now we're going to do a little bit more styling here on the links themselves. So let's go ahead and select the links. Let's add a class. We'll call it secondary header link. And then we'll just apply that class across all of these links. And then we'll go ahead and style them all at once. So let's paste that in and drop it on there. And then paste it in here on the last one as well, and add the class. Now we can adjust the styling in one place and get a good effect across all of these elements. So when we change the colors, everything's going to adapt to the color we pick. We're going to do kind of a dark purple, probably almost black here, maybe a little bit more towards the blue side. And then we're going to go ahead and go to advanced typography, and we're going to set the font size to 14 pixels and the text transform to uppercase, which gives us a nice effect for this type of secondary navigation or header row. That looks pretty good. Now we have the secondary navigation at the top, this main navigation and header here. and we're pretty much good to go. But we did talk about sticky and overlay. Now, we may not get into overlay in this video, but I do want to show you how I would use a sticky state for this header. When you scroll down, you don't want the sticky state to take up too much screen real estate. So it's often a good idea not to show these header rows with secondary navigation. So what we'll do is we'll actually hide this row in sticky. So we'll click hide in sticky. And now if we just go to our header builder and enable sticky, let's go ahead and save that. And we'll jump right up to the front end here and just check out our results. We've got our menu, our header, our little call to action logo, and then some secondary navigation here above the main part. And if we scroll down, when it becomes sticky, we don't have that secondary navigation. We also don't have a background color, which is mildly problematic. So let's just do that really quickly. Now let's go ahead and save that and jump up to the front end. Now you can see this nice effect. So that's a pretty nice, clean looking header, and that's how you can build it with the header builder. Now let's take a look at building out a similar thing with divs. So I'll leave this one here as a reference, and let's go ahead and drop in a div. Now, this is going to be a little bit more work because the div doesn't really do us any favors from the get-go. But we can go ahead and save some trouble by copying these elements across. So we'll grab our logo, and I'm just hitting Command or Control C to copy and to paste. We're pasting those into our div. Now, we've got our main elements. We want to add some padding. So let's do size and spacing. Let's do 1 rem of padding on the top. Set that to all the way around, and then pump that up to 2 on the left and right. So that looks pretty good. But we also want to stack everything as a row, so we'll set the layout to horizontal, center it vertically, and then we want space between. So you can see we're getting a very similar layout pretty quickly, but we're also going to need that secondary navigation. So what we'll do is we'll just add another div. Now this div is going to go into the div we're working on, which we don't want, so we'll just drag it out. And let's grab this background color here, and we will just add that to this div. Then let's grab our UL. We're not going to rebuild this custom navigation element. We'll just copy and paste it. And then similarly to what we did before, we just need to align everything to the right. And then we need to add some spacing on this row. So we'll go to advanced size and spacing and just add 0.25 rem, I believe is what I did before. So we'll drop that in. Now you can see a very, very similar look. This might actually need more padding on the left and right. Let's do 2, something like 2. Yeah, you probably want to match the padding you have on your main header row. So there's what that looks like. Let's go ahead and let's hide this header builder completely. First, we'll hide it in the builder by clicking the little eye icon. And then we'll go ahead and hide it on the front end by setting a condition that will never be true. Obviously, that's not a real post ID. So now we can work with just our div-based setup. So let's go ahead and save and look on the front end. Let's hit refresh and watch the change. Boom. We do have a width issue here. In Oxygen, there is an inherent kind of page container width that is handled for you by something like the header builder. So these are going to need much more padding on the left and right, or you're going to need to add an inner container with a max width, which is probably the better choice. So since we're focusing on best practices here, let's just do that. We'll add a div. We'll drop our content into that div. And then this div, we're going to set to advanced size and spacing. We're going to go width 100%, but we're going to go with a max width of something like 1120 pixels, which is the default in Oxygen. Now we're going to need to redo some of our alignment stuff here. Just shove that over to the right. Now we can actually reuse this div in our main header area. We're just going to have to paste that in, delete the sub element here, and then drag these in. Now we'll have to probably adjust the alignment on here. Yep, we're going to set this to horizontal, center it vertically, and then space between. Now we get essentially the same effect, but on the front end, we should have everything centered, but we don't, and here's why. On the actual outermost div, we need to make sure everything is centered horizontally. Because it was originally the only container, everything was a little bit wonky. So we'll need to do that on both of these divs. And we can set it to vertical or horizontal. It doesn't really matter unless there are multiple elements. And in this case, the only child is this container div. So there we get an effect much closer to what we saw with the header builder. Now, let's say we want a sticky effect here. I believe we can do this. For instance, we want just this portion to be sticky. Without JavaScript, it's not possible that I'm aware of to make it become sticky after a certain scrolling distance. So what we have to do is just plan on it being sticky as soon as the user starts scrolling or as soon as this element hits the top of the viewport. We can do that under custom CSS by saying position sticky and then top 0. We want it to become sticky when it is 0 pixels from the top. So let's go ahead and jump up to the front end. And now if we scroll down, you can see that that does its thing. Now our background color's a little bit off there. Let's see what we've got. Let's make sure we've actually explicitly set a background color here, because I think what we're seeing is actually the page background behind this element. And that's exactly what happened here. So let's go ahead and scroll down. And now you see we have this sticky position. And it does hide a little bit behind the admin bar. So that's something to definitely consider if you think logged in users are going to be viewing this. But if you're logged out and just visiting the site and don't have the admin bar, it would look perfect. So now we've essentially replicated the header builder layout and some of the functionality with just divs. Now we didn't get into overlay with the header builder because it's pretty straightforward, but let's go ahead and play with a bit of an overlay effect on this element. As I said, sometimes headers can be considered anything that's above the fold, like in the case of Stripe. So let's go ahead and drop in a section here. And of course, we don't want that section inside of the div, so we'll drag it out and then kind of reorganize our stuff. Now, this section is going to be a pretty big section. Let's go ahead and set it to a height of size and spacing. We'll do a height of maybe 90 VH. And then once we have our overlay effect, that will all be resolved here. Right now, it's a bit too tall. I do want our header to overlay. So in this case, what I'm going to do, let's get rid of this secondary navigation. And let's drop this straight into the section and see what we can do with that. Now, we're going to want to remove this excess top padding here because this is a big hero header situation. And then we're going to want to make sure we don't have any background colors on this div itself. We don't. Now let's go ahead and add an image element. This is going to be our background image. You may not need to do this. A background image may be sufficient, but this is an opportunity to show kind of an interesting trick. So we're going to go ahead and choose an image from our library. I'll try to pick something that will look good with an overlay. Maybe this, since it's nice and light on the top. Now we're going to go to advanced layout and set this thing to position absolute. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that if we're absolutely positioning something, we definitely need to set the parent container to position relative. So under advanced layout, we're going to set it to position relative, and there it is. Now we can go back to the image and we can set it to a width of 100%. And instead of doing a bunch of stuff with top, right, bottom, and left positioning, we're just going to use custom CSS and set this to inset 0. That sets it to basically 0 all the way around. Now we need to probably go back to the primary tab and set the object fit to cover. Then the parent, this section here, needs to be set to advanced layout and overflow hidden so we don't get any of that image outside. Now the image is going to be really annoying because, let's raise this div up. We're going to raise its Z index under advanced layout to 1, which will bring it above the image. There it is. Now we have our overlay effect. But it's going to be really annoying to work with because every time we hover over this image, Oxygen thinks we want to click it. And of course, it's going to hide the other stuff and raise the image up in the Z index. So to combat that, we're going to go to Advanced Custom CSS and set it to pointer events none. Now, I would encourage probably only doing this while you're working on the design. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to impact anything on the front end. I don't think it will, but definitely do your own testing to make sure that it does not impact anything negatively given your use case. So now we have the overlay effect, but I don't want these background colors on these links. So we're going to go to the general styles of the site navigation element, and we're going to set use transparent background for top level menu items. Then we're going to tweak our CTA a little bit. We'll go to CTA styles. We'll set it to outline instead of solid. And then we'll set in fact, we may not need to do that. Let's hover it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I thought we would have to set the colors, but we don't. Okay, so now we have this pretty cool little header section, which includes our logo and navigation. Now let's go ahead and drop in a columns element. And we'll just set it to 4060. And then on the left column, we're going to go ahead and drop in a heading and some text. And of course, we're going to need to raise the z-index up on that as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Advanced layout, z-index is going to be 1. Let's just edit our text here. Welcome to my site. And then drop in some lorem ipsum here. And we might also want some space above this columns element. So let's go to advanced, size and spacing, and just drop 2 rems of margin above that. Now this is a pretty light background, so we could just set our text to a dark color. And in fact, because our navigation links are dark, that's probably the best route here. But we're going to have an issue with this text that fades into the darker part of the image. So we're definitely going to need to do something about that. There's a few different things we could do probably, but one of the easiest ones would be to just lighten this image. So we can go to advanced effects with the image selected and choose filter. And then we can go to brightness. We could raise the brightness up, which can work, but in this case looks pretty bad. So let's go ahead and look at contrast and maybe just lower the contrast. And that turns it gray. We don't want that. We could do a grayscale effect, which might help a little bit. But in this case, probably the best route, since these options don't work, we also have blur as well, which won't help us here, but does give you a pretty cool effect. But these aren't really appropriate for what we're doing here. So we're going to go over and just change the opacity and lower that down. And that's going to give us that soft background image effect that we're after, which actually helps us out because the next thing we're going to do is drop in another image on this right-hand side. And before we get too far with that, let's give some space below this heading, advanced size and spacing, set the margin bottom to 1 rem. And then over here, we're going to drop in one of these images. We're all mountainy with the background image, so we'll continue that theme. And let's go ahead and go to borders and give it a rounded border. We'll give it like 12 pixels or something like that. And then we'll go to advanced effects and give it a box shadow. So let's choose almost black color and lower the opacity a bit. And now we can play with the parameters here. Give it a little bit of vertical offset, some blur, something soft like that looks pretty good. So now we can save that and jump up to the front end and see the effect we have. Again, this would be considered like a header section. Instead of just a navigation bar with logo and navigation links, you now have everything above the fold that you want users to see immediately when they visit your site. Now you can do this with the header builder, but you're not going to have as much fine-grained control over it. Though the header builder does allow you to disable overlay on certain pages, which can get a little bit complex. So if that's something you need, where you need the overlay header on certain pages but not others, that's worth looking at the header builder. In this case, we could actually just have 2 headers if we wanted. In fact, let's go ahead and unhide this one. We'll get rid of that fake condition and unhide it. And then we could use the conditions to show these headers only in specific scenarios. So for instance, this one would be great for the home page. So we could go to conditions, set condition, add a condition and choose, post title or post ID, however we want to identify the page on which this should be shown. And then down here on the header builder, we could just set the inverse. We could go to conditions and set the condition, choose post ID and choose does not equal. and just plug in whatever we put in for this one up here, which gives you an effect where you have the appropriate header for whatever you're viewing. So I think that introduces a lot of the basic concepts of building headers in Oxygen and gives you a few ideas on how to replicate some popular patterns. Again, this is Elijah with the Oxygen team, and thank you very much for watching.